So let's go ahead and take a look at the internet weather for this last week or so here. And first thing I wanted to share with you was actually a sort of an interesting observation. This, we've been talking a lot about reflection attack activity, and this is one where we haven't seen too much reflection attack activity using SNMP as the reflection vector. I've certainly read about some significant cases in the past, and there have been some correction measures put in place in a lot of networks to help prevent this sort of thing. But this is a case where at least there was a sustained attack activity. Started around, I guess this was on April 23rd, about midday, and has continued through, and it looks like it's may continue to be taking place as we speak here at a lesser extent. This is still not significant. It's not a huge attack, but certainly one that we want to be watching for. That is, if you see a lot of source traffic, or if you have, perhaps more pertinent, if you have devices that are exposed to the internet that have SNMP capability, you want to make sure that that's turned off or block it in some manner. Next item here is sources probing on port 443 TCP. We talked a little bit about Heartbleed early in the program here. It's kind of winding down, but there certainly are organizations that are running around still looking to see what devices might be susceptible to Heartbleed. This is more of a low and slow kind of activity. Generally, to me, that kind of equates to perhaps some malicious intent behind it. There certainly has been a lot of probing activity looking for devices just to scan the internet and see what the landscape is. But this is more persistent. It's low, slow, using a lot of different IP addresses to kind of hide the sources. Most of these sources are in Argentina, or coming from Argentina, I should say. There's also a U.S. university that we think actually has legitimate intent behind it. It's a lesser extent in terms of the number of addresses doing the probing. Most of the probes actually, despite the fact that we're really showing the number of sources doing the probing, most of the probes are still from a small number of sources in China. Next item here is scan probes on port 8009 TCP. This is actually the Apache JServe protocol. John's nodding his head here. You've seen this before. This is probing activity, most likely looking for Tomcat servers, which we've seen a lot in uses drop servers, for example.
Right. APT actors have been using Tomcat a lot, or exploiting vulnerable Tomcat servers. I don't know that that's what this is. I'm just saying that Tomcat has been targeted before, so not a big surprise here.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this from a few different source addresses in China. It's kind of moved around a little bit. It's not as if it's very pervasive. And I'm also including here on this slide a link to a blog that talks a little bit about this is sort of the unknown port associated with Tomcat, and one that is shows up as maybe accessible from a server if you haven't deliberately done something to control it. Next item here is scan probes on port 1900 UDP. This is Simple Service Delivery Protocol, which is actually a sort of an underlying or supporting protocol associated with universal plug and play. And there are actually kind of two possibilities here. I think we've speculated in the past that the actors might be looking for vulnerable universal plug and play servers, but this is also potentially a vector, being a UDP protocol, that could be used for reflection attacks. We haven't seen a lot of significant activity around this particular port in reflection attacks, but that is certainly a possibility. Now, John, maybe there's an organization apparently that's doing some probing deliberately, not for malicious purposes.
Right, trying to enumerate how many devices are out there that are exposing the SSDP as a vector for reflection. So, they're trying to get a handle on it so that maybe we could, if there are large pockets of these in particular organizations or companies, et cetera, they can do some notification to say, you might want to clean these up, or at least verify whether they should be open to the internet in general. Like we said, DNS has always been traditionally the reflection vector protocol, but lately we've seen NTP, we've seen CareGen, we saw SNMP, now SSDP. So there's, they're investigating all sorts of these UDP protocols to see what they could leverage, the bad guys can leverage as a reflection vector for attack.
Right. So some of this activity seems to fit the profile of what we thought might be associated with these, these good actors that inform, trying to inform folks. But some of these bigger spikes that we've seen recently don't seem to fit that profile. So it seems to be perhaps another organization. They may be perfectly legitimate, but I'm not sure why an organization from China, for example, will be probing the United States for informational purposes or to notify organizations. So, and that is the case that some of these bigger spikes are coming from a source in China. That's the case with this particular port. I didn't go and take a look specifically at others, that is other ports that are associated with reflection attacks to see if there was an association or relationship between those, but perhaps we can take a look at that for next week. Next item here is basically looking at our standard pie chart, the most probed ports. No particular surprises here considering the things we've been reporting lately. This is at the top of the list here, port 22. Next in line, port 23, and then next in line, the port 5000 TCP. These are all associated with these this internet of insecure things that are being compromised and used for bots, and subsequently used to find others that can be compromised and using them for other activities too. We still have port 445 here, surprisingly diminished compared to what we typically see. Next is port 443, a lot of this probing activity for what we had referred to earlier, probing, looking for heartbleed vulnerable servers. 1433, that's a Microsoft SQL database, usually password guessing, as is 3389, which is remote desktop protocol, same sort of thing. And then follow that by what I'll describe as generic probing, that's 8 ICMP, which is basically a ping request. And then we have port 80 and port 8080 looking for perhaps vulnerable web servers. Next is the most sources doing the probing. High on the list here, port 443 TCP. That's we already looked at the graph associated with that. We see a significant growth in the number of sources that are doing that probing. Next in line, port 445. I was in the process of actually assembling a sort of a long-term trend view of port 445 and found that it doesn't look like there's a lot of activity to diminish. That is, it's not diminishing significantly. I was actually, so perhaps we'll be able to take a look at a graph of that next time. And then next followed by port 23, port 80, port 8080, a couple of ICMP ports here, and then port 5000 TCP showed up here. Now we know what the port 5000 activity is, but this is the first I recall it's showing up in terms of the, on the most sources doing the probing. And we have reported on this a number of other times, so I'm showing on this graph the last 90 days of activity in terms of sources that are probing, that is number of sources probing on port 5000 TCP. And again, this is a Synology Disk Station Manager, and we continue to see sort of this sawtooth pattern. The first tooth in the saw here was the initial scanning activity. Apparently they were getting something they wanted, got pretty aggressive, renewed that scanning activity a number of times, and it looks like it's more into maintenance mode at this point. That is to perhaps regain devices that have been rebooted or something, and they're trying to get those back online, which incidentally, I'm not sure we've mentioned this before, but most of these exploits that we've seen in the past where the devices are compromised, you can reset the device, power down or do a power reset, and that will generally clear the malware out. It's not a persistent storage of the malware, but it also opens it up for the vulnerability again, so it could potentially be exploited again unless you do something to change passwords, that sort of thing.
Yeah, particularly with those DVRs, it seems like a lot of those only allow you to write files into the temp space, which you'll get, flushed when you reboot the thing.
You'd have to do a firmware write to somewhere on the board itself to change that.
Right.
That's why you have to, if you have your own home routers, you got to go in there, reboot the whole thing, install the firmware. It's not like you can just make a change.
Right. And last but not least item here, just thought I'd share with you the daily reconnaissance index and how that's progressing along. We had some significant spikes occur in the last few months, but it seems like it's stabilized a little bit. We're still well above what we'd hoped to see, down in the 30s last year, and we're still way up into the into the 40s and almost into the 50s at this point. Most of this is in terms of the number of probes, as opposed to, you see in the blue down here, there hasn't been a real significant change in terms of the number of sources. That's significant because what tends to change when you have a significant worm that's propagating is a lot of sources that are showing up. We haven't seen real significant changes in the sources, so we don't have what I would describe as a mass infection, but we certainly have what I would describe as pretty aggressive probing activity that's taking place.